Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with designated drinker, Professor David Kyle Johnson, the author of The Myths That Stole Christmas. So if you missed part 1, you need to go back. Go back and belly up to that bar and give it a listen first. We promise we will save a seat right here for you. So in part 1, you shared a little bit about your book, a whole lot about Santa, and blew Gina's mind. Literally blew Gina's mind. We'll pick up the pieces later. But you know what I'd really love to do now is, if we can we jump right into the book and talk about the 7 misconceptions, maybe a high level, let us kind of understand what each one of those, I know you wrote, correct me if I'm wrong, I know you will, that each chapter represents one of those 7 misconceptions, correct?
That's right.
So give our listeners an idea, like a high level, a little bit about your book and how you got there.
Yeah, okay. So I'll talk about the 7 myths in a minute, then I guess I'll tell you how I got there. I got there by, I just became curious about the history of Christmas, and I read a book by an author I do not recall. It was self-published, called The Heathen's Guide to Christmas. But it was self-published. And so it was very interesting. Mm-hmm. I learned some interesting things there, but I wasn't sure how accurate it was because it was self-published, right? So I basically went on a fact-checking mission before I think Snopes even existed, right? Like I went on this fact-checking mission to figure out what the real history of Christmas was. And so I read a whole bunch of books on this, kind of became obsessed with it, as I tend to do with things.
We would have never noticed.
So there was a Classic Kings that was newly created called Liberal Arts Seminar that was themed, where you could pick a reading theme and read a bunch of articles and books and stuff on a particular theme. It was supposed to be a critical thinking, critical reading class for kids. And I kept talking about this at lunch with my professor friends, right? And one of them who was in charge of this said, you really ought to do a course on Christmas and have them read all these things that you're reading and stuff. So I developed that, and then doing that over time eventually, led to me writing this book so I could use it in this class. And now I don't teach the class anymore because Liberal Arts Seminar changed, and that's a whole other thing. But now I have all this research that I put into the book, and the book, of course, still exists. And so that's kind of where the book came from. And so the way I approached it when I wrote the book was like, the one thing I noticed that the class did for students was it debunked their misconceptions, right? That they had a certain idea about what Christmas was, where the traditions came from, what it was about, and studying the history of it just kind of undoes all of that, right? And so I identified essentially 7 myths that I thought were very common in my students, that taking the course undid, and then kind of dedicated a chapter to each one of those myths. And so the 7 myths, I'm going off my memory here, see if I can do it. The 7 myths are, and so each chapter this is the title of the chapter, but the point of the chapter is that the thing I'm about to say is false, right? Yep. So myth number 1 is Jesus is the reason for the season. This is the idea that Christmas is originally a Christian holiday invented by Christians and is mainly a religious Christian holiday. All of those things are false. And so I kind of talk about the early history of the holiday in the first chapter. The second myth is that there's a war on Christmas. That in modern day there's this effort to undo the holiday and make people not celebrate it anymore, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I debunk that idea that there's a war on Christmas. The third myth is that our Christmas traditions are old-fashioned. So we, think about Santa Claus and, a bunch of the things, Christmas trees and evergreens and lights in the window and all that kind of stuff. Oh yeah, we've been doing this for thousands of years, and buying gifts for kids and that kind of stuff. And I go through the kind of more recent, 200 years old history of Christmas. And we realize that most of the things that we think of as old-fashioned traditions today are recent inventions, at most about 200 years old. So like even giving gifts to kids, that's only about 200 years old.
I'd like to unadopt that one immediately.
Do it. It's not that old. You could totally undo it. And you will be actually celebrating Christmas in a much more traditional way if you don't give gifts to kids. And this is related actually to the fourth myth. The fourth myth is that Christmas spending is good for the economy. I argue in detail in chapter 4 that it's actually not very good for the economy in multiple ways, and that we could most certainly be spending our money in ways that are much more beneficial to the economy if we gave up our kind of Christmas spending and spent that money in a different way, either throughout the year or even spent it differently at Christmas time. Myth number 5 is that Santa Claus is Saint Nicholas, right? We talked about that last time, right? So I go over that in detail. Myth number 6 is that the Santa Claus lie is harmless. Of course, people, parents will lie and trick their children into believing that Santa Claus is literally real. I argue against that. I argue against that in that chapter and say that it's, if you want to be, not that you're a bad parent if you do it, but if you want to be the best parent you can be, you probably ought to give up that lie. Not to say that you should give up Santa Claus, not to say that you can't pretend that Santa Claus is real with your kids and all that kind of stuff, but stop tricking them into literally believing that it's true. And certainly once they figure it out, trying to trick them to continue to believe, even though they sort of figured it out. I argue against that practice. And then myth number 7 is simply that Christmas can't change. People think it's this juggernaut that's always been the same and it always will be. And so there's nothing we can do about the fact that Christmas, kind of harms us in multiple ways. Nope. It always has changed. It's been a continual state of flux. It's been celebrated in different ways, over the years, and and it will continue to change. The only question is, will it continue to change for the better or the worse? And so I argue for it, ways to essentially change it for the better.
That's great. You know what's going to change me for the better, Gina?
I'm gonna pour alcohol down my throat. I'm gonna skip the cocktail today. Like literally, I can't even. Kyle, my mind is blown today.
That's what the book is supposed to do.
But I will tell you this: I'm listening to, and if your listeners, you need to go back to episode 1 because he talks about the Christmas trees in your house, and all I keep thinking of is I live in a stone house because I live like right over the Maryland Pennsylvania border in Middletown, and I live in an old one of the founders' homes here. So he was a Koblenz German, right? And I'm thinking in the room that used to be the kitchen, would they have had a Christmas tree? So the whole time you're like talking about this, I'm thinking, would it have gone on fire? Well, the house is made of stone. It probably would have survived.
It could have, right? They normally put those trees in the parlor. So it wouldn't have been in the kitchen. They would have put them in the parlor. The parlor was a room that children generally weren't allowed in. And this would be like the one day of year they were allowed in would be Christmas, or if they're doing St. Nicholas, and they would put the tree there. And then, of course, if it caught fire, they could just throw it out. But that's usually where it was placed. And if they had it, it would have been a small tree, like the top of a fir tree that would be set on top of a table rather than a full-grown one that was sitting on the floor. But that's where it would have been if it was in that house, which if they were German, they probably had one. If we're talking like 1800s, they probably had one.
It's funny because you talk about the traditions of the German Christmas, right? And like my family is all Italian, so we believe in the La Befana. So the Christmas witch comes, and like that's real in Italy still. So you would have and you would give chocolates or candies.
Right. That's kind of their version of Krampus, right?
Yep. But it's so funny because I'm thinking like my father would always be like, oh, the Befana is going to come for you. But like my father was from Italy, so it was kind of like, like what we believed. And then you're saying all this, and I'm like, she's terrorizing my children. And my husband has an app on his phone for Krampus, where like he'll be like, oh, did you want me to call Krampus? I'm like, no, don't call him. So we're like the worst. Like we're like just feeding right into it. We're like, we're gonna call Krampus. You better be good. The Italian witch is coming for you. We're giving them all of it. They're gonna have a heart. These kids just messing with their heads.
Well, and that's one of the things is that Christmas is the origins of Christmas and the origins of Halloween are a little bit related. And some of those kind of, horrid, horrible, scary kind of things do make their way, into Christmas right, that way. Right. And you can actually hear this. You can hear a very faint image of this or idea of this in A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Right. Yeah. That, when St. Nicholas would show up with Krampus, you would hear the chains, or if Krampus was coming, you would hear the chains from a long way away. And that was this kind of portents of scariness, right? In A Christmas Carol, when Scrooge is in his house and he's about to be visited by the ghost of Jacob Marley, he hears chains, right? And then in addition, Krampus has bells. usually very, very large cowbells. Belsnickel has this too. He has bells on him as well. And when Jacob Marley is showing up, you not only hear the chains, but the bell above his door rings. And so there's that little bit. And notice that, the most famous Christmas story of all is A Christmas Carol. And what is it? It's a ghost story, right? Through and through, it's a ghost story, right?
All right. I'm going to become Krampus any minute now.
All right, we're making the drink. We're making the drink. Sorry.
Until time.
Sorry. All right, so we're gonna make a hot drink today. And you might be having entertaining for the holidays, and you're not gonna go out. A lot of people aren't gonna go out and buy, a brand new see-through hot cups or whatever. But what I love is like repurposing other things. And like one thing I find really fun about like the holidays is like making it look cute and like what's different. So like I love to use like ball jars, like these squat ones, because you can hold a warm drink from the top and it doesn't burn your hands. And then like you could tie a bow on it or do, something cute or whatever you want to do. One thing just don't decorate your glasses that you're going to be drinking out of with mistletoe. It is poisonous. So we're going to do a non-alcoholic version of this, or if you're going to do an alcoholic, either or. At this point you would do, you'd add about 1 ounce of your favorite bourbon or rum, something dark, something spicy. I'm going to use a little good old American Maker's Mark. Put about 1 ounce in there. When you're making hot drinks, you don't need to make them too over the top alcoholic. You don't need 2 and 3 ounces of booze in them because the alcohol, when it's warmed like that, hits you very quickly. So 1 ounce is more than enough, right? So we're going to pour in there our chai chocolate drink. And what I like about the recipe, if you use the water and you can use like you can use almond milk whipped cream to garnish it. Like it's so great because you might have a vegan friend or vegetarian friends that don't eat cheese or whatever, and you could keep it a little bit with less heavy with all the actual cream and start using some of the vegan stuff. So I'm going to put this on the side here. And then just for fun and like, however you like to do it, you can put in a little, cinnamon stick or something, make it, a little bit more cuter. But it's honestly delicious because the chai and chocolate together is like super delicious. And like, I love it. And I realize that chai means tea. We all get it. But chai has become a flavor in the world for some reason. And literally it is because it has garam masala in it. And garam masala is made up of, 5 different spices, primarily cinnamon, cardamom, and those spice flavors. So this is my drink for you, Kyle. So cheers. Louise, what do you think? You ready?
I'm almost there. I'm right behind you, Mama. I am chopping up a little bit of chocolate to put on top.
See?
And I have a really pretty little teacup. Look at this.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
See, that's what I mean. Like you make it your own. Teacups, whatever you want. I just like in like, tradition of being a bartender and stuff, see through, see what you can drink. What you're drinking is like always my presentation. But yes, I love it. And you can also, honestly, this drink can also be served cold. So if you're someplace, in a hotter climate, like, down south, you don't have to make this hot. It is delicious.
Who's that remind you of? Oh my God, Gina, this drink is so good. This is like, I hate to say it, it's like Christmas in a glass.
It is good, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever think that steeping tea and hot chocolate would work so lovely together? They really do. And you can also use, like if you like a little bit more aromatics, you can use like a nice Earl Grey or something really deep like that would work really well. But you have to use like the deeper flavors. That's why this fake chai flavor is, it used to be called Marsala tea and it changed. Somewhere along the way it became chai tea. Do Do you know when that happened, Kyle? I feel like you do for some reason.
I do not know. I do not know. I learned from you that chai means tea. I just now a while ago. But I want to use that point, that true fact, to make a point here in just a minute.
Before you do that, I gotta make Gina do one more thing, and she's gotta tell us where are we gonna go to get this cocktail recipe, Gina?
You're gonna go to designateddrinker.show for the tips, tricks, how to. Also follow us on Instagram so you can see the trick of how to make this syrup and cook it so you don't get any syrup, this base, so you can keep it for longer in your refrigerator.
Yep.
And you can do that on Instagram. Yes. You can follow us at designateddrinker.show. Designated drinker, not dot show, just designated drinker at
show.
Instagram. Jeez, hello.
Des Drinker.
I'm sorry, all my Christmas hopes and fantasies have now just been flushed out of the toilet. So now all I have left is Maker's Mark and chocolate. Now I know my truth.
So the other thing, just so our listeners know, you can just scroll down in our episode notes and you will have a link to the website, which is designateddrinker.show, absolutely. And the other thing is we're going to make sure there's a link to Kyle's book. It's The Myths That Stole Christmas, 7 Misconceptions That Hijacked the Holiday and How We Can Take It Back. So it's a really great read. I have a copy right here.
Great Christmas present. Do you think? Like,
it is. It fits perfectly in your stocking.
I feel like it's just like one of those things, especially if you have to do, like a gift swap or something like that with people. Like, it's very unexpected. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
I think that's very, very cool. I feel like I'm going to be giving that and be like, okay. And then like, that's what you give at Christmas. I'm like, yes.
You know what they could do is they could get a copy of this book, download the recipe that you made, and they can sip the cocktail that you presented, Gina, and read a real true holiday read.
Mm-hmm. New holiday.
It's not. I'm not overt about that kind of marketing as a little book by I believe Wadfogel called Scroogeonomics, which is I partly borrow from that book for my 4th chapter on why Christmas spending is not good for the economy. But it is literally like this big. It is literally made to fit inside a stocking.
Oh, that's awesome.
The book itself, right? So it's about yay thick, and then it's about yay big, and you drop it in people's stockings, and it's like, this is why I didn't buy a Christmas gift, because Christmas spending's not great for the economy. It's not as overt as that, but that's another good one.
And Kyle gets invited to nobody's Christmas party anymore. No.
That is not true.
I'm just kidding.
Kyle's the entertainment.
Yeah, if that was true, it would be because I wouldn't shut up about Christmas when I was there, right? Yeah. I'd be that annoying person that'd be like, well, did you know? Did you know? Did you know? I don't do that at Christmas.
So, that would be really great. Like Kyle's book, a little thing of whatever, like your favorite spirit, the recipe, and then the other little book you mentioned, that'd be a perfect Christmas gift.
That'd be a perfect little gift. Yeah, absolutely.
I want to know what Kyle was going to talk about chai about. Tell me about the chai.
Yes.
Okay, so this actually leads into the history of Christmas. So you guys ready to talk about the history of Christmas?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So here's the point I wanted to make to use this, and this will lead into the description. All right. Some people think you don't need to study the history of Christmas because you know where Christmas came from. It's right there in the name. Christmas, Christ Mass. It's Christ. It's Christ. It all comes from Christianity. It's a completely Christian holiday because it has the name Christ right there. Right. So you don't need to know the history. The history is essentially contained in the word. Right. And that's not true. And the reason it's not true is for the same reason that today chai does not mean tea, right? It literally translates as tea, but given the way that we use the word today, chai has taken on a new meaning and indicates a particular kind of tea. It indicates a particular kind of flavor.
Yep.
Right? Am I tracking? Are you tracking with me here?
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? And so it's, even though chai literally translates as tea, that's not what it means today because that's not how we use the word.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
The same is true of Christmas. Christmas does not mean it's Christ Mass, it's Christ's holiday, because that's not how we use the term. When we talk about Christmas, we're not talking about anything particularly religious. When we think about Christmas, we think about Santa Claus, we think about presents, we think about snow, we think about Rudolph, we think about, the most famous Christmas story, as I mentioned, is A Christmas Carol. The most famous Christmas song, it's either Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or it's I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. Right? All of the things that we think about Christmas are secular. The first things that we think about are secular. And you have to go way down the bestsellers list for a Christmas song to be religious, right? In order for it to kind of make that cut. And so this leads us to like the actual real history of Christmas, right? So you can't argue that, well, Christmas is obviously a Christian holiday because it has the word Christ in it any more than you could argue that, well, Sunday is for worshiping the sun because it has the word sun in it, right? Which, by the way, that is why the name Sunday, it refers to the sun. It really used to be for sun worship. That's why that's where the name comes from, is it's from sun worship, right? Saturday was Saturn's day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Monday was for worshiping the moon, right? Wednesday was actually Odin's day, because that's one of the other kind of names for Odin had to derive from that kind of WED, that Wednesday word. Thursday was Thor's day. All right. So to find the origin of Christmas, we have to go back to those traditions that we talked about before about bringing back the spring. Right? And what life was like in ancient times when winter would set in. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, we had agricultural societies, right? They were afraid of the winter, but one of the things that they did to prepare for the winter was feast. Because late November, December, late December, that time of year was kind of the only time of year where their work was done for the previous year, the harvest was in, right? B, they didn't have to do any work until next spring when they started to plant, right? And C, this was the only time of year that they had that kind of plentiful food and especially fresh meat, because before the winter, they would cull the herds, so, kind of downsize them so that they would, better survive. And so this is the only time they would have that had fresh meat. So they have no work to do. They have tons of extra food. They need to fatten up for the winter so that they'll survive a little bit better. So what are you going to do but party, right?
Hey.
And so this time of year was this giant feasting and, of course, with parties, drinking time, right? Where you would have these huge celebrations with tons of drinking. And, of course, what goes with lots of drinking? Lots of sex.
Summer babies.
And so...
Sounds like my kind of time.
It would have been, right? Like, I mean, it is an orgy of like metaphorical orgy of food and drink, but literal orgy of sex. People are, and there's cross-dressing. There's all kinds of crazy things that go on in this time. Okay.
That sounds like any day at Gina's house. I mean, come on.
So, coupled with this is there's some other traditions that are kind of related to the wild man because they have to do with bringing spring back and that kind of stuff, but it's a little bit different. There's Tagmuck, if I'm remembering the name of that right. This leads to the Saturnalia and that kind of stuff. There's a couple of other holiday traditions, but these earlier ones have to do with what they thought needed to happen to bring the spring back is that, like, the gods had to have help fighting off the forces of chaos that were bringing on winter, and you have to defeat them to bring the spring back. And so it was thought that the king would need to descend into the underworld to help the gods fight off the forces of chaos. But of course, how do you get to the underworld? You got to die, right? And kings didn't very much like being killed, right, to do this. And so what they would do is they would appoint like a prisoner or a peasant or something as king for a day. Oh. And that day they'd be king and they'd get everything, all the food and drink and women or whatever they would want. And then they'd be killed at the end of the day so they could descend into the underworld and help the gods fight off the forces of chaos.
So Gina, I think this could be a tradition that we could adopt, and we could just put our husbands up for that role. They'll just think, they won't even know. It'll be like sheep to the slaughter, right? Literally. They wouldn't even know. We're like, look, you get all these great things.
You could be the king for the day.
For the day. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And you have greater callings. See, I think that's something maybe if we're adopting and adapting, maybe this is one that we grab a hold on to.
Well, in a certain kind of way, this tradition still does exist. And I'll kind of get to that as we go. So it's this social inversion practice, all right, where like the king is lowly and the peasant is high for a day.
Yes.
Right. So there's the social inversion that happens, right? This continues on, and eventually appears in Saturnalia. So Saturnalia is like a Roman, Greek, and mainly Roman holiday, not holiday, like it's a harvest feast.
Gotcha. Tradition.
Okay, in the same kind of vein, and it was put on by commanded by the god Saturn, and part of the commands was that there would be this social inversion, that essentially stasis in society didn't matter at Saturnalia, and so everybody sat at the same table and everybody would get access to the same food and drinks and all that kind of stuff. So there's this social inversion that happens in Saturnalia as well. All right, and so. But that's all part of the feasting and the drinking and all that kind of stuff that goes on there. Okay. So Saturnalia also occurs around the same time as the Romans were celebrating the birthday of their god of choice, which was Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus, as you might guess, solar, is the sun god.
Yes.
Right? And the reason that Sol Invictus's birthday was thought to be around this time is because this is when the days start getting longer, right?
Sure.
They go shorter, but they get to the shortest around December 21st, 22nd, and they start to get longer after that. And so you might guess now, right? What is the day that essentially the days are becoming noticeably longer than they were before? December 25th.
Sure.
And so December 25th was the day that the Romans celebrated the rebirth of their sun god. Okay. And this was the god of the Roman Empire for a very long time. This was certainly the god that all the Roman soldiers and that kind of stuff worshipped. All right. Well, what happens is, Christianity comes along. They do not celebrate birthdays. They certainly do not celebrate Christ's birthday. Celebrating birthdays is the kind of thing that pagans do and that Roman emperors do because they think they're so grandiose. You don't celebrate birthdays. If you celebrate anything, you would celebrate a death day. This is why all the saints' days are on the day of their death rather than their birth.
Really?
Right? But they did not celebrate birthdays. Okay. So they did not celebrate. This is to make the point that for the first 300 plus years of Christianity, Christians did not celebrate the birth of Christ. This is not something that you would do. That would be a pagan practice. They did not do it. Okay? All right. But then what happens is around early 300s, 323, I think, Constantine converts.
Yes.
He converts to Christianity, right? And the story goes, and it may be partly apocryphal, but he has a dream where his soldiers put a Cairo on their shield and they win the battle. So in the real world, he has them do this. They win the battle that day. Notice that this is very much a warrior god, right? God is protecting us in battle. So God's even violent, even within Christianity here. But he decides, God, the God of Christianity actually protected us, so I better convert. So he converts. But he doesn't just automatically take the whole Roman Empire with him, right? Things did not work that way back then, or ever have worked that way, right?
Of course not. Yeah.
And so, all the Roman soldiers, they're still worshiping Sol. All of the Roman Empire is still worshiping Sol. And so, when December 25th comes around, even though Constantine has converted and is Christian and says, "We are the Holy Christian Roman Empire now," everybody's celebrating Sol's birthday on December 25th. Sure. Right. And everyone's still doing the big Saturnalia feast and all that kind of stuff. Right. And so what is an emperor to do whenever he's Christian and his empire is supposed to be Christian, but everybody's celebrating pagan holidays?
Yeah.
Right. Well, what you do is you declare that Jesus was actually born on December 25th. And so what everyone's actually celebrating is the birth of Jesus. That's what's really going on.
It's the beauty of propaganda, assimilation. It's a human trait.
That's crazy.
It is. And it's
crazy.
Part of that same adopt and adapt method, right? It's the same adopt and adapt, right?
Yep.
We're just going to take what they're already celebrating, Sol's birthday on December 25th. We're just going to say that's Jesus's birthday and that's what they're celebrating. The people that are doing it right now know that that's not true, but as long as they still get the party, they don't care. But a few generations on, people will forget the original meaning and they'll think that that's what they're actually celebrating. And so after, a few hundred years, that's what people think they're celebrating. The celebrations continue in much the same way they did before. It's just kind of done with a different name.
Kyle,
right?
I believe the lies.
Yeah. So here's I believe the lies too. And so here's what I think we do, Gina. I think we start to adopt and adapt some of the old traditions and bring them back. We'll have orgies on Christmas. We'll sacrifice a guy at the end. One man will be the king. We'll sacrifice him. And we will drink until we fall down.
Yeah, so I just picked. Yeah, let's just pick and choose all the things we want.
Yeah, we're just gonna pick and choose. And then we then what we do is we just reset the cycle again so that we start to adapt and adopt only the things that we really like.
Mm-hmm. All right, Kyle. Here's the deal. Have you ever listened to our show before? So we're gonna know on this next question.
Here we go.
I have not. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So Kyle, we, in modern times, I'm just saying like yesterday, people still, believe in like spirit animals, right? And everybody has a spirit animal that they might identify themselves with. And all of your research of, German traditions of Christmas, you might come across that the Germans identify themselves usually with a black eagle because, they're stealthy and they're very intelligent, right? So it's even on the German flag. If you can identify yourself by one spirit ingredient, whether it would be in cooking or food, what ingredient defines you and why?
Oh, so what ingredient? I'm not looking for a spirit animal. I'm looking for an ingredient.
Spirit ingredient. So it could be, I don't know, garlic. I don't know, whatever you like.
And what first comes to mind?
First comes to mind is the best answer.
The first thing that comes to mind is a jalapeno.
Great. Why?
And the reason why is because it both tastes good, but it also hurts.
Yes.
Right? And this is how you were describing our conversation earlier, right? Yes. Where you're like, oh, this is great. And my entire world is shattered. Yeah. Right? Like it's like, oh, it's so cool to learn that thing. And that's where it came from. And now I also feel really stupid for doing that thing. Like it kind of has both elements of, it tastes really good, but it also hurts a little bit.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So yeah.
It's so true.
It's great. And it can hurt going in and going out.
Yes. Oh. And it can, just like what we're doing.
On that note, cheers, Kyle.
Yes. And
I can't talk about Christmas and butts. Cheers.
But happy holidays, everybody. Have a wonderful and safe holiday. Make sure you drink responsibly. Always take that in mind and celebrate and enjoy life. That's at the end of it all.
And use
that's
Uber.
What we're promoting. We are all about celebrating life and enjoying the things. And to Kyle's point, think about what you're doing because critical thinking is important, even if it hurts, like a jalapeno does. Go right ahead.
Can I so the social inversion that happens? One of the things you might want to add to your holiday or whatever that still existed throughout the Middle Ages as giving to the poor as charity.
Oh yeah,
right. We still do that by putting kids on top, and that's a recent invention where they're kind of king for a day. That's why we give them gifts and all that kind of stuff. But gifts, charity to the poor and that kind of stuff still exists and exists as a tradition at Christmas time. And so that's one of the ways that you can actually change your tradition to make it more traditional.
Yeah.
Right? That you voluntarily give to charity, that kind of stuff, right? But it also makes it traditional, but it also that's the one way that Christmas spending can be good. If we start giving down the social ladder where my $100 is not worth as much to me as somebody who doesn't have as much and that $100 is worth a lot more to them, and you could create economic value.
Absolutely.
And that kind of stuff in that way. But that social inversion is that's one of the oldest Christmas traditions. It dates all the way back to King for a Day.
That's awesome.
Right? And it just slowly changes over time. And that's one of the ways you can be more traditional.
Awesome. That is a great way. Thank you for adding that. Absolutely. If nothing else, people should walk away with that. You're 100% right. All right, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Cheers. Thanks. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. The Designated Drinker Show is produced by Missing Link, a podcast media company that is dedicated to connecting people to intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Also in the Missing Link lineup of podcasts is Rodger That, a podcast dedicated to guiding you through the haze of dementia, led by skilled caregivers Bobbi and Mike Carducci. Now, if you're looking for a whole new way to enjoy the theater, check out Between Acts, an immersive audio theater podcast experience. Each episode takes you on a spellbinding journey through the works of newfound playwrights, from dramas to comedies and everything in between. Find Missing Link's League of Podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Please don't forget to subscribe, download, and review the shows. Your review helps our shows reach new audiences. To find out more about Missing Link, visit missinglink.company. That's missinglink.company.